Now for today's program. Tiffany Shlain's work explores the intersection of feminism, philosophy, technology, neuroscience, and nature. Among her many awards and distinctions, Tiffany, who is founder of the Webby Awards, was honored by Newsweek as one of the women shaping the 21st century. Her recent art exhibition, Human Nature, was presented by the National Women's History Museum, and one of the sculptures from that show, Dendrofeminology, a feminist history tree ring, is set to be displayed on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. this fall. Tiffany's award-winning films have had multiple premieres at the Sundance Film Festival, and her best-selling book, 24/6, Giving Up Screens One Day a Week to Get More Time, Creativity, and Connection, received the Marshall McLuhan Outstanding Book Award. Joining Tiffany today is award-winning journalist and author Nadine Epstein. Nadine has been the editor-in-chief and CEO of Moment Magazine since 2004 and is the founder and executive director of the Center for Creative Change. Nadine's most recent book is RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women, 33 Jewish Women to Inspire Everyone, written in collaboration with the late Supreme Court Justice during the last year of her life. Please welcome Tiffany Shlain and Nadine Epstein.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, I love the title of our talk, From Barbie to Artificial Intelligence. Just sit with that.
Well, it's a
and everything in between.
It's a wide open conversation, and that's why we call it that, so we can talk about anything that we want.
Love that.
So, anyways, I'm so happy to have you here today. Just from having met you briefly in San Francisco at, I think, the Fairmont Hotel, and from reading your book, I feel like we're soul sisters. We're soul sisters who are born and operating on opposite coasts. We're both propelled by curiosity and creativity. You're a filmmaker, I'm a writer, but we're visual artists, and we're deeply interested in the human brain and well-being and the sacredness of time. We did a whole issue on time, science and artificial intelligence and feminism, and of course, like how everything is connected. So I hope we're going to get to talk about a lot of these things.
Well, I'm super excited. I love your writing. And I think it was a friend of our mutual friend, Rabbi Sydney Mintz. I was like, you two need to know each other. She was like, I'm just going to make it happen. So when someone...
And we did it, even though we're both so incredibly busy. We did it.
But it's always fun when a mutual friend like realizes a shidduch that needs to happen. And so I'm super happy to be having this conversation with you.
Well, I want to start talking a little bit about your book, since I just actually been reading it kind of carefully over the last few days. And it came out 4 years ago, but it's still as relevant as ever. And it's a Y2 how-to book about the importance, even necessity, of what you call tech Shabbats, which are breaks from technology based on the model of or merged with the practice of Judaism Shabbat. And I just feel like the book is a very accessible exploration of the human brain. And it's way more than just about tech Shabbat. I mean, really, I got a lot out of it about the human brain, what the brain needs to perform well, to be creative, to connect deeply with others, to strengthen memory and meaning, as well as just basically exploring human character and exploring humanity. I also feel like it's part memoir. So I got to know you a little bit better. It's about the amazing family you were born into, and also your own nuclear family. Your husband, Ken, and who's the director of robotics at Berkeley, right? Is that what he does?
Yeah, he's a professor there. Yeah.
Professor there?
Yeah. And also...
and your daughters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was part memoir because I did not grow up doing Shabbat, and really came to it with my husband after this kind of dramatic period of my life where I lost my father and our daughter was born within days. And so really the kind of feeling that life was grabbing me by the shoulders and saying, change the way you're living, because and obviously I'm a big advocate of technology, but I was feeling like it was starting to take over my ability to be present, as I'm sure many people feel. So it was like, I feel this with everything, that I have to kind of start with my own perspective. Like everybody's got a unique perspective. And the older I get, the more I just know that that's my starting point. And so to start with my own story of being such an advocate for technology, as well as my husband, I mean, he's a professor of robotics, but we're also very critical of it at the same time. So starting this practice of turning off all screens one day a week for Shabbat, which we call our tech Shabbat, in a world where the only people we ever really knew that really observed Shabbat were Orthodox Jews. And we are very much cultural Jews, but love this practice of Shabbat. And it's been such a profound change. I mean, now I've been doing it for 14 years, which is crazy. And it's changed my life. So, I think a lot of my work, if you watch my films, they all have a little bit of memoir, a lot of science, a lot of history, philosophy, and then a lot of questions. And I usually end with a question on it. Any project. Hopefully I'm starting with a question. I'm asking a lot of questions about it, and I'm ending with a question, because that's very Jewish. That's what we do. We ask a lot of questions. So, but I think the mix of memoir and science, and it's a comfortable place for me to start any journey, because it's so honest. Like there's stuff I don't know, and then there's stuff I know. The stuff I know is what my upbringing was, or my perspective is, and how it might change, if that makes sense.
I loved the combo of memoir and science. I'm the daughter of a physicist.
Yeah.
So for me, science is a touchstone, and I love it. So, I mean, you actually answered my first question, which was like, how did you even get to this? How did you stumble upon, Tech Shabbat?
Well, I mean, I think there's two parts to it, because like growing up, I didn't really know anyone that did Shabbat. And then when I fell in love with Ken, he was a new professor at UC Berkeley. And I remember I was running the Webby Awards, or I just started. And I was like, well, I have to work on Saturday. He's like, oh, I don't work on Saturday. It's Shabbat. And I was like, I thought that was so sexy. Like, you have such a boundary. And he had lived in Israel doing studying at the Technion robotics, and the whole country shuts down. So he grew to love it. So when I first met him, he actually practiced Shabbat in the terms of no working on Saturday, which I loved. But then when the iPhone came out, so we met in 97, and then the iPhone came out 2007. And I think that was the real game changer. When the iPhone came out, it made it so you could never turn off, and that phone and work and everything was right in front of you all the time. And that was the moment where it blurred every boundary. So here he had a boundary, but then it blurred every boundary. And then when my father died a couple of years later, I was like, I don't like the way my brain feels. So let's do something more extreme. And we're part of Reboot, who was doing like a national day of unplugging. And we turned off all the screens for one day, and it was like exactly what we needed. And we had done Shabbat like once a month, maybe, but now we do it every Friday.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite part.
My first of first questions is really, I remember when I actually got my first iPhone in 2008, and it completely it just really revolutionized my life artistically. Because I began to do my eyeshadow project. As soon as I got my iPhone, I started taking photos of shadows, and I was in Ukraine. The first time I actually had my iPhone I was in Kyiv, and it was really amazing. And then also how I organized my creativity and my thoughts and my ideas all transformed because of my iPhone. But I was wondering what it was like for you when you first got your iPhone in 2007.
That's interesting that you're using it in such a positive framing of revolutionize. I mean, yes, I think it was exciting as a filmmaker that I had my video recorder and my camera and my music and my internet and everything on one thing. But what I found is I lost my sense of presence. I do love recording things to inspire me. I take a lot of pictures. I put them in a visual journal. I love being able to document so easily. And I remember way before the iPhone, I remember in my bag, if you can remember, I had like a flip phone, I had a camera, I had a cell phone, and I had a database for contacts. There were all these.
Your Palm Pilot, yeah.
Exactly. So it was great to have them all in one. But I think that was also the moment that I felt like the promise of technology, that everything's in one and there's no boundaries. I found that was too much for my brain, that I was everywhere and nowhere. I was never present. And I didn't like that feeling.
In the beginning, I mean, in 2008, I wasn't texting with anybody.
Right.
I wasn't really, all those negatives hadn't actually appeared yet.
That was more like 2009. And
that came later. So there was this sort of innocent relationship that I had with my smartphone. I think
that's right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. You're speaking to someone who just went on a silent retreat with not only no talking, but no contact, no text. Basically, I call it living in airplane mode. So I only used my phone for an alarm. And
So are
that
you
was
allowed to, you're not allowed to write?
no, I write.
Could you write on your silent retreat?
I could, but I decided to use paper
No,
because
I mean on
I
paper. So
hadn't
on
used
my,
paper for a while. I do still write. When you're in airplane mode, you can still write.
okay, because I always wondered about that because my most creative day by far is on my tech Shabbat and I write my journal by hand. So during the week, I also write by hand in the morning and the evening, but Saturday's like 3 hours straight of hand on paper, moleskin, pen,
Yes.
writing. And I was wondering if on a silent retreat, 'cause my best ideas come when all the technology's off and I actually can think.
Yes.
So I thought silent retreats, you weren't allowed to write anything down. So I would probably
You
try a silent retreat if I could write.
Well, I made up my own silent retreat.
That's
This
good
was
for
the
you.
Nadine silent retreat. And I nobody made any rules for me. I had to make my own rules.
I like
So
that. Like, I'm gonna do a Tiffany
it
Shlain.
included I could have my phone because I'm obsessed. Although I actually normally I have to walk. This is the other thing is I have to get, I have to do 5 miles a day. And it included, but I actually took off from my 5 miles a day. I did not, because I have to keep my phone with me, but I
Mm.
didn't keep my phone with me most of the time. So on my silent retreat. So we can do well, I'll explain to you my
I
silent
want to know
retreat.
that. I want to do the Nadine
Yeah.
silent retreat.
Okay.
So
Well, let's.
okay. I was going to say one thing is that recently I started wearing a watch again. And
Yes, I
that's,
only have a watch. I just,
yeah,
yeah.
it's an amazing thing because you realize how much you just want to know what time it is and you don't go
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole of your phone. And it's very liberating to be like, I'm just looking at the time. There's nothing else that's coming to me except the
So
time.
I went into an Apple store in Manhattan and I bought a watch.
Oh,
And then but the whole time I was so nauseous
yeah,
that we bought it and then my husband returned it for me the next day
I think that's a smart
because I
decision.
just couldn't, it made me ill. So even though but anyways, let's go on here because I will have a lot
Okay.
of questions to ask you and you and I could chat for a long time. But I just wanted you to, so the whole book really is an argument for Tech Shabbat. I mean, there's all the chapters come back to why Tech Shabbat is so important. But I was just wondering if briefly for our audience, you could give us three top reasons why, because there's, before we move on.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is I actually think it's the most brilliant idea of the Jewish people or people is
Mm.
Shabbat, one day of rest. And we've never needed it more. And hardly anyone does it except the super observant religious people. And what I'm proposing to you is an invitation to engage with this very ancient, thousands of year old tradition. Like, I like any idea that's lasted thousands of years. Any idea that's lasted, I'm like, I got to look at that idea. And I'm saying, to look at it and reframe it with what it means in modern society and how it can work for your family. So number one, it's an ancient, brilliant idea. Number two, it's like the best thing I've ever done as a parent and to myself, because I feel like that's the day it all comes together. And then third, it gives this amazing rhythm to the week that I just love. I just like, what is on Tuesday? Wednesday, I used to start thinking, okay, now we're getting close to Shabbat. And then we always have people over on Friday night. I know I'm going to unplug. I know it's going to be like a really Hamish refilling evening, social. Saturday is I journal. It's more silent, walks in nature. And then Saturday night, we're super excited to go back online, find out what happened in the world. So I think the rhythm of the week, I'm going to add a fourth, if that's okay, is I feel like you're a creative person. I always like to think, when do I feel most creative? When I travel, like that is very inspiring to me. My Shabbats. I have all my best ideas happen on Saturday because I think, and I've done a lot of films on the neuroscience of creativity, and your brain needs time to process everything it's received and to integrate it with everything that's happened to you and like create new ideas. And if we spend all of our time just getting new input all the time, we never give our brain that moment to do its magical thing, which is really come up with new connections and new ideas.
Yes. Well, I actually have to say that I took a little tip from your book last night, which was that before I went to sleep, I actually thought about things to be grateful for, and I slept much better for it. So thank you.
That makes me happy.
So I just want to talk a tiny bit about character, because you talk about character and the prefrontal cortex in the book, and you made a short film about it. and it's such an important part of humanity, but it's something we just don't think about at all. And basically, could you just very briefly tell us what the science of character is and how our oversaturation on smartphones might be messing around with it?
Yeah. Well, it kind of came from me being delivered really research on positive psychology, which was kind of a radical idea that for years it was like, what's wrong with you and can we fix it? And that's what psychiatry and psychology was about. And then Marty Seligman and Eric Peterson are these two
At Penn, yeah.
and they said, instead of looking at what's wrong with you, let's look at what's right with you and figure out. And they actually itemized the 24 character strengths that all cultures value and then the virtues from those. And then there's been all this interesting research on certain things you can do to build your sense of gratitude, like you just did before you go to sleep. Or how do you build your courage muscle? Or, that each of us are made of a certain combination of strengths, and certain things do strengthen them. And then what are the weaknesses that you want to strengthen? So it's just a kind of a very switched way of thinking about it from a positive psychology viewpoint. So, the prefrontal cortex is like the conductor of, it's your filter for like, you have a feeling, you think about what to do, and then you act on it. And taking that beat before you act is an important thing. It's like taking a moment, like, how should I be a mensch in this situation? I made a version called The Making of a Mensch that's like the Jewish film version of the science of character film, but it's really like how to be a mensch, right? To be a mensch, you can't just, you have to take a beat when you need to and think about the best thing to do and not just be so reactive. And a lot of the technology makes it so easy to just email, respond, text, be reactive. And really, that's what I like about my Tech Shabbat also, is I have this day to think about maybe something I'm wrestling with, something I'm trying to figure out. It gives me the space. It's like a prefrontal cortex day spa, because I get to actually think without acting.
Yeah.
And I think that's what your silent retreat was about too, is like, we have this big, beautiful brain, and we're always in this one mode by being online. And we need to remember that our mind needs lots of different modes of being. And
it was so fabulous. It's like, it's so much joy. I just have to say that the no tech, and also for me, the no talking, because so much of my life is talking, was just like unbridled joy. It was just,
I'm gonna try it. You're inspiring me. Thank you.
Yeah. So I actually just want to talk a little bit about envy. Because one of the things that I noticed, and you very briefly mentioned it in your book, is that it seems to me that how people use social media is often just to talk about the amazing things that they're doing and the fabulous vacations they are on. And I mean, I've done this too. But what it really does, I feel like, is engenders envy of other people. And envy has always been something that I've battled. And I had a lot of ways of dealing with envy, but I feel like once social media and being able to access it constantly came on the scene, that it's really gone wild, and it's hard to control envy. And I'm just wondering, how to use Tech Shabbat in that way?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad you brought up envy. That's so interesting you said it, because last night I was looking at this quote that I saw once in an artist studio, but I think it was Jefferson who first said it, but it's, comparison is the thief of joy. And that's a lot of what social media is. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes envy can motivate you to work to do something too. Like there's this whole, I'm sure you know about Musar. I made a Jewish version of the science character called Making of a Mensch. We have a whole section about Musar, because that's really about how you can dial up or dial down something. Like everyone says, like, patience is a virtue. Well, maybe not. If it's about women's rights or trans rights, don't be so patient, so there's moments where you should dial up or dial down, which is kind of a different way to look at your strengths. So there's one idea that envy can kind of push you to do something. But in terms of social media, I do think about it a lot. Especially I have 2 daughters, and I was going to text them last night this article about comparison is the thief of joy, because social media is so much about that. And, I have to promote my stuff online. And I've had a newsletter for 25 years called Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I usually start the newsletter. It's quite long. I do it once a month. And I've been, it's also kind of like, it's my way to help shed light on, it kind of was like the Webby Awards. I spent the first decade of my life running the Webby Awards, where I was shining the spotlight on other people's great work. And I sold it like 17 years ago. And I've been working on a lot of my own projects, but I always still love highlighting other people's stuff. So my newsletter starts with whatever I'm working on, whether it's like DC, dendrofeminology, or a film or a book. And then below it is like 25 books, films, podcasts I think are amazing that you should check out. And for me, I haven't really thought about it that way, but I'm kind of like showing my work and sharing the love. And I think it does like balance this feeling of not just like, this is what I'm doing. And that's
The
what a lot of
self-promotion of
well, I have a problem with that word, because I feel like a lot of, if you're an independent artist, who else is going to promote your stuff? And
well, this is not a topic of, I know. So for independent artists, it's different. And I agree. I wasn't using it in terms of you, but I was using it in sort of the general terms, the way you often see it in social media.
Wait, social media. Yeah, that's what, no, you're right. Because social media, I mean, my favorite parts of social media, what used to be on Twitter, where I could share other people's stuff. And Instagram stories is a little bit like that, but it's harder. It doesn't feel like as natural. So at the core of social media is like, on the beauty of it, if you're an independent artist or writer or whatever, you can share your work. On the bad side, that's all you're doing. And so it does bring up all of this stuff of envy and comparison. And I'll tell you, I feel relieved when I go off on Friday night, because sometimes I feel like, oh, I have to post. And then you get into this cycle where I'm like, I don't want to post, and I don't want to overthink this and like get this out of my brain. And I feel the biggest feeling I feel on Friday night is a sense of relief to unplug my brain from the network. I'm just like, I feel like I'm like a plug. My brain is like this actual plug. And I go, oh my gosh, look what's right in front of me. My beautiful family, my dog, my garden, like what's right in front of me. And it is just such a relief. So
and you become present. You talk about being present. And that's totally. So much of what we're not being present. So it's so easy these days not to be present, because you can fill every minute with this little thing and just get on and start scrolling. And it's an illness. So,
I think just to circle that one thing is that when I turn it off, it kind of makes me not think of everyone else. And I start to kind of be present with right around me. So whereas on social media, it's like, oh, I wish I was at that event, or I want those shoes, or that, want. And I turn it off and I'm like, I have everything I need right here. And it's such an immediate switch that happens every week. You would think I would be off all the time, but I do also love being online. I love like feeling in the zeitgeist of it all, and releasing a project on it is very exciting.
So one of the things that you talked about, and we're going to switch topics soon, but was, you have certain tools, things that you do on Shabbat, on your tech Shabbat. And one of those is journaling. And so I've been journaling my whole life, drawing journals and writing journals. And so and how you use that to really spend that time to understand yourself better. And I felt like that was a really wonderful thing for all of us to do, that you spend time every Shabbat morning reflecting on the week before. And I thought that practice was a lovely practice. And while some people might benefit and love to go to synagogue, not everyone does. And this is a wonderful way for you to connect with Shabbat. So I just liked that a lot.
Yeah, I think journaling is like, I feel like I return to myself, and that I unpack what I'm thinking.
So journaling goes very much with the silent retreat. So,
okay. I'm gonna try that.
So, and the other thing that you did talk, and you mentioned this, of course, is that, you've actually merged tech Shabbat with the Jewish Shabbat, but not a Orthodox necessarily version of Shabbat.
Right.
But you've merged it with all the traditions and the dinner and the family time and this, and I guess, do you think that tech Shabbat and the Shabbat of Judaism go better hand in hand?
Yeah, it always surprises me. And I do know quite a few like really observant people that still are texting on Shabbat. And I'm like, that makes no sense to me. Like, and whatever loophole they're working in. I think it's about a day of rest. It's a day unlike any other day, is the concept,
Yeah.
a temple in time. So to me, what's different than every other day is going offline and being present. So it really, I mean, I think I call it tech Shabbat because tech is so in our faces all the time that it's the thing we are doing without to get something else. And that's another thing too, is like you're giving up something. And then I think my tagline is like to get back more time, creativity, and connection, right? So you're giving this tech up and you're getting this bounty. And so it's just been, you know, my daughter was just in Israel and living in Tel Aviv doing an internship. And she was so surprised how it really felt like there was just the Orthodox Jews doing it. And like Tel Aviv is very secular. And there wasn't a lot of in between. And I guess I'm into the in between. Like I'm into the, how do we take these very old rituals and make them relevant for our lives today? And I feel like Shabbat felt so unavailable to me as an agnostic Jew, verging on atheist Jew. And that it never felt available. And then once I started being like, oh, it's available to me, it was so, I mean, there's so many people who read my book that are now doing it, or people that aren't even Jewish. Like, listen, I do yoga and meditation. These are practices from other cultures. Like, again, it's one of those ideas that's withstood thousands of years, and it's a great idea to live well.
Yeah. So there are many people practicing. I actually got this from my son, who has been doing it for quite a while, who was be like, Mom, you got to do this. You have to unplug. So, but reading your book really helped fill it all in for me. So thank you. So I want to talk just a tiny bit about your family, because I have a bunch of things I really do want to ask you.
Okay.
You came from this really wonderful family. I'm sure as complicated as all families are, but you know, from each, and I was wondering, like, your dad was a neurosurgeon who was a speaker and a writer, and who wrote about somewhat similar topics, I think, than you are in some ways. And your mom is a psychologist. And I was wondering if each one of them gave you, is there something you learned from each one of them that you've brought with you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. My father was a general surgeon general surgeons back, I mean, they don't really have that role anymore, but they did everything. They operated on the brain, they delivered babies, they did emergency surgery. But, you know, he brought a brain to my class for bring your parent into school day. And that started a fascination with the brain. And that same grade, fourth grade, when he brought that brain in formaldehyde and gave a tour of the brain biologically, my mother was going back to school to get her PhD in psychology. And so she would study alongside next to each other, and she'd teach me all these things about psychology. So I think they both planted the seed for this fascination of neuroscience, psychology, and they both always worked for themselves. They both were entrepreneurial, both as a doctor and a psychologist. And my father was a very bold thinker. He used to always say, think big and just like go as big and wide as you can go. And my mother always ran support groups. So gather people in a circle and
create community. Yeah.
Create community. And I think what I'm doing in DC is a combination of both of them. Whereas my dad was like, think big, and my mom's like, gather. So this is kind of this event in the fall, which I'm working so hard at, is, you know, where the National Women's History Museum and Women Connect for Good are putting my feminist history treeing on the mall. And it's about both of those ideas, which came from both of them.
Well, I was going to say that as a writer, that there was something I loved in particular about something that you said you learned from your mom. Was the way I loved how she organized and held on to thoughts by collecting words and quotes. And like, were they in jars or something?
She has all these notebooks and
saved them, and how she sort of, it seems like you've integrated that just from reading your book, which is full of quotes and words, and like, well, what does this really mean? What is the word? I don't know if, you know, I can't remember. I wrote down some of them.
Yeah, that's why my mom always like has a notebook by when she's reading an article or a book, and she's always like writing the word she loves or the idea, and then she has these books and books, which I love. Yeah, that's definitely from my mom.
Yeah, there were just some words that I was like, because we have a section called Jewish Word and Moment, and I grew up always looking up words, and I'm always fascinated by words. I think of words as containers for ideas and thoughts, and I'm always fascinated about like well, anyways, but I wrote them down. I don't know where they are now because I took all these little notes on your book, but I can't find them. But they were just some wonderful words that you went off and explored.
Oh,
So which brings us to feminism, and just curious, so feminism, first of all, it's a loaded word. It's been a loaded word ever since I was a little kid. It's and but well, we can talk, and I want to ask you a little bit about that. But what does being a feminist mean to you? Do you
um,
even call yourself a feminist? You do call yourself a
oh,
feminist.
totally. No
Okay.
question. And I think feminism is about having underrepresented groups represented in
Mhm.
equity and equality in our society. And so I think, this event we're doing in DC, reproductive rights are totally on the line. My producer of 17 years is trans rights are on the line. And the intersectionality of feminism, I think part of our goal with this event, it's very exciting to us that we're kind of reminding people of this bigger umbrella of what feminism means. And yeah, I definitely, the art piece, which is like the kind of tree rings you see at Muir Woods, but I've redone it as like a distillation of 50,000 years of intersectional feminist history with 30 points. And it's very much intersectional, is like also interdependent. I mean, I've made a lot of films about interdependence, like everything's connected. Like you bring up underrepresented groups, everyone wins. And yeah, and I think, and both my parents were feminists, and I'm very excited to kind of gather everyone together in DC because I feel like we need a gathering. Like the Dobbs happened and nothing really happened. And there's 93,000 races on the ballot this November, and it's the 1-year marker to the presidential election, but we need to not take our eye off the ball. I feel like, my daughter just getting back from Israel and really seeing that country succumb to religious right-wing people and patriarchal ideology. And I was thinking about Odessa, Ukraine, where my family's from, and how my grandfather had to escape from there. And you have to fight for what you believe in. And the protests in Israel are very inspiring to me. And we really don't do that here. But I'm hoping that a really powerful gathering will really be a much needed jolt to inspire people to vote in this, what some people call an off year. There's no off year. And not take our eye off the ball of what this country can be.
Well, my focus has always been, how women and the traits that they're associated with are so important for leadership.
Totally.
And I mean, to me, like we just have to have more women in power on a whole wide range of things. And it's not just always women, but people, those traits that have been associated with women, the consensus building, the listening, the empathy, and how important they are for governing. And
I mean, I think after seeing the Oppenheimer film, and I've made a whole film about women leaders, and I'm going to make a big generalization right now, which I know is not true in every case, but if you grow a child inside of you and deliver it and raise it, you're not going to want to send it to war, and you're not going to start as many wars. So the taking care of the planet, they're not having as many wars. If we had more women leaders, that would be the result, is less violence and destruction. Because it's just, I think so much about the power struggle. And I think a lot of it, I mean, all these abortion bans, it's women hold this ultimate power of making a child. And this is like the most fundamental power dynamic, is men trying to say, well, you're going to have a child every time you have sex. And it just keeps this power structure in society that we have to fight against.
I always think about the word feminism and how people have such a mixed relationship with this word. It's like, there are many people I know who are feminists, but they would say, I'm not a feminist. And I'm wondering if there's another word that
I'm a believer that I like the word. I mean, I think, it's interesting, the ERA, which is very, it's been ratified now. It's this very old thing. And
not really ratified. It's not really ratified.
Well, the time limit might be, well, I think it's closer than it's ever been. And the younger generation, like there's some people like, oh, well, let's get something new. No, let's like this thing passed. Like the Equal Rights Amendment would protect so many issues that younger people believe in. And I think going back to the word choice, I think educating people on what feminism means is very powerful. I mean, instead of changing the word, I would rather, and what we're trying to do in DC is kind of remind people how big this umbrella word is. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's almost like, I felt it's a lot with like, I don't know. I think you can change words or you can reclaim them. And I guess I'm interested in both. It's not like I'm always like taking the old word. Like Shabbat, you could say I said tech Shabbat, which is like updating an older word, but it's ultimately Shabbat. But I'm just like, this is the twist that I'm bringing with what we do with it. But I think the word feminism, I think it's really powerful to remind people what it means. And that it kind of got hijacked in the last couple of years, I think, in the wrong direction of people defining it as, it's almost like patriotism. Like I believe in America, but that word patriotism seems very like a right-leaning sentence, but I don't want that. Like I want to take back the fact that I can, love our country and want to fight for what I believe it can be instead of not using the word. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, we can talk about this more offline because I have very definite ideas about some of these things, but
I'm sure.
But I wanted to switch a little bit to AI because I said we were going to talk. We forgot Barbie. Oh my gosh. Somehow I lost Barbie along the way. Somehow my Barbie questions have disappeared. But why don't you just quickly tell us about Barbie? How it is that you made a film about the tribe and the concept of tribe and also the Jewish tribe and decided to build it around Barbie. I'm fascinated by that.
I'll say that quickly. So 18 years ago, I was in the first class of Reboot, which was kind of bringing culture makers together. And it was this amazing weekend and about bringing together a lot of Jews who never talk about, they're not associated with traditional Jewish organizations, and bringing them together to see what would happen. And that same weekend, Ruth Handler died. And I knew that she had created the Barbie doll.
Okay.
And I always thought it was like one of the great ironies of the 20th century that a Jewish woman created the ultimate shiksa, which I'm often mistaken for because my name is Tiffany Shlain and there's no C in my last name. So all my life, it was always like, no one thought I was Jewish. So my husband and I thought that would be a great way to dive into assimilation and identity. And my husband's a blonde, blue-eyed Jew named Ken. So I thought we would have a lot of fun working on that script, which we did. So it was 18 years ago. And that's another word, the tribe, which I kind of is a very old word that I was kind of re-updating in some ways. And we made this film that premiered at Sundance 2006 and played all over. It's used today still. And then we re-released it right before the Barbie film came out. And it's been very fun to see this whole second life happen with it. And it's just 15 minutes long.
Yeah, it was fun to watch.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about AI. Because as you know, Moment's summer issue was this very ambitious exploration of AI.
Great issue. We loved it. It's so good.
Yeah. And we really asked whether a big question, is it good for humanity? And we included you. And as it turned out, also your husband, although I think people, when we came up with the names, not everyone knew that you were actually married for this big question project. So you write that you actually embrace AI and that you use AI in your work. And I was just wondering briefly again, if you could tell us how you use AI.
Right. Well, for 5 or 6 years, I've had an AI assistant that most people don't know, Clara, who I'm even sure Suzanne, I think, was writing to thinking it was a human. But I'm always thinking of what are roles that don't require a human, like scheduling in different time zones. That's a perfect use of AI. Why should I have a whole human with all their creativity and empathy focused on time zones and scheduling? So I've had an AI assistant for many years. I usually try to save people, but sometimes I forget. You'll schedule this with my AI assistant, Clara, but sometimes I forget and they think she's real and they think she's fabulous. That's number one. Number two is I'm working on a new film on the neuroscience of the adolescent brain. And I do a lot of kind of brainstorming with ChatGPT. Like, tell me about this research. Okay, shorten it. Tell me it from this other book's perspective. And I mean, like, they can read a book in a second and then give me that different contrary view, or this. They can find amazing patterns and things. I was at the Tribeca Film Festival and I was giving a talk on like the links between filmmaking, race car driving, and crypto. And I was like, and it was just fun to kind of play around with like the vast amount that's been written about that. And then, of course, I'm still synthesizing and distilling, but it's like a great brainstorming partner for me. So I of course, am worried about disinformation, people not assessing what's real and what's not. But I think that just means you have to question things more, which I think is very Jewish. And if we all need to strengthen our questioning ability, I mean, that's called the scientific method and being a critical human being. So
yes, and we can do that, but we have to practice it. We forget that
yes,
practice.
you have to strengthen that muscle.
Yeah. So you actually talk about, I guess having experienced and kind of the beginning of social media and also being a vocal advocate for Tech Shabbat. Are there things that we can learn for this, like from the early web days or from now, like lessons that will help us with AI?
Yeah, I think that it's not going away. I mean, I think this idea that we're going to like, the government's going to come in and figure it out how to moderate it. I don't think that's real. I don't think it's realistic because I don't think they really understand how it works. And so I think it is here, and it's never good to lead with fear. It's always better to lead with curiosity. And I mean, one of the reasons when I did the Webby Awards was that here was this new medium which people were scared of back then too. And I was like, let me give it a framework of this award show. We'll bring in all these expert minds and help like kind of identify what's the best of it. And I think in that same realm, like we should just be talking about it a lot and not being like, I tell most people that are really scared of AI, I'm like, have you ever used it? Have you ever tried it? No. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you 3 assignments. I want you to go on ChatGPT and ask it these 3 questions. And it's interesting. Play with it. Like, don't be so scared of it. And then let the people in the wrong hands take the lead on what they're doing with it. I ultimately believe, like Marshall McLuhan, that technology is just an extension of us. And it's like, what is it extending and what is it amputating? And that's the question we should always ask. And we should be playing with it and experimenting and talking about it a lot, which that's why I loved your issue so much, is it was such a compilation of different perspectives, kind of wrestling with what is this, but it's not going away. I mean, that's a similarity to the web. It's like, it's going full steam ahead, and we either go along with it or, you're going to just be in the camp of like, oh my God, humanity is going to go away, which it's not.
And there's no stopping it. I agree with, there's no stopping it. And it doesn't seem to me that it's even possible to really make regulations that are really meaningful. Yeah. As much as that would be wonderful. And also, who makes those regulations? The government, companies, people. There's just, it's just something, it's here to stay. So we have to learn to deal with it. Right. But you talk about in your book about sort of the difference between machine minds and human minds. And I guess I thought maybe we could end with that a little bit about, and how Tech Shabbat can help strengthen the kind of traits that are the human traits. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, and this is really, my husband has spent, 35 years in robotics and AI. And what he always talks about, which I think is so beautiful, is the things that AI and machines can't do, which is like empathy and creativity and taking initiative. And so I feel like my days when I disconnect from the network, I'm strengthening all of those very human skills. Like I'm present, I'm more there's more empathy, there's more connection. And I notice things, I make connections between things. Like these are all things that are uniquely human. And as we kind of propel forward, we need to lean into our humanness, because that's what we're bringing to the table. The AI is bringing the vast language model sets that they're drawing from. And we're this unique human that if you take time to unplug the network, you're going to be able to ask it more interesting questions. You're going to be more critical, and you're going to have the perspective that you lose when you're plugged in all the time.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you very much. I want to leave a little time for people to ask questions.
Sure. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you both so much. Great conversation. Somebody would like to know, what are your thoughts of the fact that so many Jews find the need to qualify their Jewishness? I'm Jewish, but I don't celebrate Shabbat. I'm Jewish, but I don't keep kosher, or I'm just a cultural Jew. What do you say to that?
I think because Judaism is both a religion and it's a cultural, it's two. Like, I think that's unique about Judaism is, and I think when people find out that I do Tech Shabbat, they immediately assume that I'm religious, and I'm really not. And so for me, it is very important distinction because I do this practice and I'm kind of known for it. I meet people that think, like, if they haven't read the book and they just hear, oh, you observe Shabbat, like they just look at me a certain way. I'm like, that's not where I'm coming from on this idea. And actually, some of my favorite ideas are like ideas embedded within a religious idea, but I'm just kind of pulling it out and engaging with it in a different way. So I think the qualifying part is because there's so many different ways to be Jewish. And I don't know if you could say that about being Christian, or, you either believe in Jesus Christ or you don't. But could
No,
you
I think there's a lot of ways to be Christian too, I
but can
think.
you live as a Christian? I remember somebody telling me this. Could you say I'm Christian and not believe in Jesus Christ?
I think you can.
Really?
I think you can. I
I
think you
remember
can be the same. You can live by Christian values. And I know lots of, I know lots of Christians who live by Christian values, but
they
don't
don't believe in
necessarily
Jesus
believe in
Christ.
God, just like Jews might live by Jewish values and don't believe in God. So I think there's a,
Well, that's
but
interesting.
it's,
I mean,
yeah.
I've always thought that because Judaism is both a culture and a religion, that people do feel like they need to distinguish what that is. Usually not if you're religious, but if you're culturally and not religious, those are the people I find use the qualifiers. And I do feel like it's an important distinction because it's like saying who you are.
Thank you. Somebody did want to mention that for them, tech has been a blessing for Shabbat because their son is a rabbi on the opposite coast, and they actually get to pray with them while watching streaming online, which I think is something very big since.
Especially during the pandemic. I mean, and I would say to people that still want to do a Shabbat, like maybe do your service, you're all by yourself at your house, and like go online for the Shabbat candlelighting and then turn it off. So let like being online be the sandwich to your Shabbat, but still have space to disconnect. And I use my landline to call my mom, and I have my love loopholes. I can call my mom and my daughter at college. And so like I think everyone makes it work for them, but I still feel like it's really valuable to turn it completely off for a period of time.
Mhm. What are the possibilities for feminism and AI?
That's a really interesting question.
That is a great question. Well, okay, I can say the opportunities is that so often women are not quoted, right? In articles. It's like you have to work harder to get it. So what if you like did some directed AI of like, I want you to tell me this story and only quote women. Like, give me the perspective on this issue, or make it even be in different cultures. Like you can ask those kind of questions. And so I think it would be, again, it's all in the question asking, but directed to give a more feminist perspective in the response.
Maybe we should have AI asking women questions because there's not enough women in the vast database of humanity who have been asked questions or answered questions, because part of the problem is that women sometimes are, when they are asked questions today, they still don't always respond. They're in the same, what we always find that if we ask 100 people to participate in a symposium and 50 of them are men, 50 of the men say yes, even if they know nothing about the topic.
Right.
And I would say now 23 of the women say yes. Used to be like 4. I have to get on the phone and go, hey, if you don't say anything, we won't have any women in this question, in this symposium. So I think having AI maybe ask questions in a way
like
to strengthen the database would be really important.
I think that's great. I like that.
Yeah.
I think that would be a fun, Nadine, we could do a symposium of how to, I mean, whoever asked that question, that's very fun.
Yes.
How do we get feminism like in the core? Because, like the whole thing with Wikipedia, most of the people writing those entries are men. So there was this whole like,
Yes.
conference about getting more women knowing how to add Wikipedia entries. And, it's like the whole, all the funnels of information. That's what we're talking about.
And there's so many more men with bios than women on
Yeah.
Wikipedia. It's
Exactly.
I think it's slanted against women also.
Yeah.
So why don't we should have this conversation?
It's an interesting one.
Yes, whoever asked that, thank you so
That's a
much.
great question.
Do you think we're doing enough to teach children about character?
Well, I did a global event for, was it 5 years, where every year we'd release a new film on character and like have all the schools like participate. And one year we had over 200,000 events. So I spent a big chunk of my life focused on that. When I have this new film on the adolescent brain coming out in the spring, and we hope to do something around that. But to answer your question, no, we should be talking about it all the time. I think the idea of character, I mean, that's why the person who shall not be named running for president has such a bad character. And how could that person be the president of our country? What are we saying to our children by that? Menshiness, like being a mensch, should be talked about all the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank
What
you.
would a mensch do in this situation?
Someone asked a great question. They said that both of you are sitting in front of a great book collection. And could you each give one or two books
Yes. Hey.
that you
Okay.
really think inspire
This book
you?
I reread every year for the high holidays. It's by Rabbi Alan Liu. It's called This Is Real and You're Totally Unprepared. And I reread it every year. I don't get through it all, but I just read sections instead of the prayer book because I don't like prayers. That's what I'm gonna. Okay, Nadine, what are you gonna suggest?
I have to think about this. Well, I'm going to grab a book here that's really something to me. It's Can Robots Be Jewish? And Other Pressing Questions of Modern Life.
Oh my God.
It's actually based on Moments Ask the Rabbi section, which I started it in 2004 when I took over the magazine. And it's such a great way to grapple with Judaism. And we ask a really wide range of people. Look, for me, I like to hear lots of different views. I've never been a person who can you can't preach to me and go one point of view, because it doesn't fit in my mind. But if I have 12 points of view that I can sort of put together and analyze, then I'm really interested. So there are just a lot of great questions in this book. It's a great thing to read I would say, for Rosh Hashanah or Shabbat. And it was edited by our wonderful and brilliant books editor, Amy Schwartz. But there's a whole section on science. Can a robot be Jewish? Should we edit our children's genes? Do science and Judaism conflict? Sometimes they do. When does life begin? There's a whole section on sex. There's a whole section on modern life. Including social media. Like, what sin should we atone for on our use of social media? Values, politics, and the nature of the universe. So
that looks good. I'm gonna order it.
Okay, so that's a good one.
I didn't say, but like.
Well, that's your book.
My book. But I was gonna say.
There's your book.
Your dad is physics. My father wrote this book called Art and Physics, Parallel Visions in Space, Time, and Light. So
I would love to look at that, because
this is how I met my husband, because my husband was a young professor who was an artist and a roboticist and came to hear my dad speak, and I was there and my dad introduced us. So this is the most important book in my library.
Well, it's something that I thought about a lot as a child, because my dad was a physicist and he was very wedded to science. And I always thought that what it was missing was that he was missing this other. He wasn't really missing it. He had it, this super creative artistic side, but he had so repressed it because you weren't supposed to mix these. And even as a little kid, I knew that you need to mix those. You have to have both of them. So I'm going to look at that. Can you order that book?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. My daughter just texted me, you have to pick me up now from school. Okay.
So as we wrap up, you don't just make films, you don't just make art, but you create toolboxes and working guides to go with them to help people make a difference. What do you say to everybody out there as we're thinking about the next thing? How can people make a difference? And
I hope you all join me in DC, because I think you need to show up for democracy, and you can either show up in DC or sign up to be online participating, but I believe good things happen when people get together in person. So, showing up without your screens one day a week for yourself and your family is really good. And then I think showing up in DC to fight for what we believe in this country is really good. I think that's what I'll leave it with.
Great. Well, Tiffany, Nadine, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Tiffany.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We will send an email later this week that will include a link to Tiffany's book, 24/6, Giving Up Screens One Day a Week to Get More Time, Creativity, and Connection. I've already put a link in the chat, as well as a link to Tiffany's website where you can sign up for her monthly newsletter, right? You can do that on your website.
Yeah, my monthly newsletter, you can sign up right on the website.
Yeah. And I will admit, I did not know that Clara was AI.
I know you didn't, because I saw you. I was looking for the Zoom link and I saw you ask her a question. I was like, oh, I gotta tell you.
No. So there you go. I had no idea.
But isn't she lovely? She says all the right things and does all the calendar invites, and it's very smooth, right?
She really did. And so
you're going to have to share, Claire. We're going to have to figure out how to have a Clara. We need Clara too.
I'm happy to make an intro. It's really, it freed up a whole human to do work on films and art instead of scheduling.
Amazing.
Great. Well, thank you.
Again, thank you both. And we will see everybody next time. Please go to momentmag.com. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Tiffany. Bye, Suzanne. Bye.